It started with empty coffins. 157 of them. They were buried over 12 long years in the small town of Greymoor Falls. One by one, the funerals came. The grieving families gathered. The church bells rang, but no one ever saw the bodies. There were no open caskets, no last goodbyes, just sealed wooden boxes, lowered into the ground, often too light to require pallbearers. Some said they felt hollow. Some said they sounded hollow. Others didn't dare check. And when the questions started, when mothers asked where their children were, when husbands demanded to see their wives one last time, the answers were always the same. The remains are too disfigured. It is an act of mercy not to look. And for a while, the town believed that, because it came from Father Drell, the man who held the town together. The man who spoke as if God himself whispered in his ear. He baptized their babies, buried their dead, and told them not to fear what they could not understand. But now, decades later, the graves remain quiet, cold, untouched. And no one remembers what the funeral sounded like. No one remembers what the sermon said, only that they ended too quickly, that the coffins were sealed too early, and that somewhere beneath Saint Eloria's church, something was waiting, because buried under all that earth, under all those prayers and rituals, was a silence too heavy to ignore. What kind of church buries the dead without the dead inside? And why did no one stop them? Asterisk. The land Saint Eloria's was built on wasn't just chosen, it was claimed. Before the steeple rose, before the hymns echoed through the valley, the forest here was untouched, thick with fog and superstition. Locals avoided it. They spoke of strange lights, of voices that didn't belong to any living soul. But in 1919, a group of settlers declared the ground holy. They said a vision led them here, a woman draped in smoke, weeping blood, pointing to the spot where the altar would be built on. It was called a miracle, or a warning. But the townsfolk, desperate for hope after the war, chose to believe in the former Saint Eloria's became more than a church. It was the heart of Greymoor Falls. Weddings were held in its garden. Harvest festivals filled its courtyard. Children played under its shadow. And through it all, one figure remained at its center, Father Marius Drell. He arrived in 1947, young, handsome, soft-spoken. But it wasn't his charm that won them. It was his presence. When he spoke, people listened. When he walked into a room, even crying babies fell silent. People said he made them feel safe, like nothing bad could touch them while he was near. They said he healed a dying boy with a single prayer, that he cast out something foul from a woman who hadn't spoken in weeks, that the trees bent toward him when he walked the grounds alone at dusk. Some whispered that he never blinked during sermons, that his shadow moved just a second too late, but he became family. And no one questions family, not when he buries you dead with grace, not when he visits your home to bless the walls after a nightmare, not when he holds your hands and promises that your grief has meaning. The town flourished. For a time, but beneath the blessings and the incense, something festered. A child went missing in 1951, a quiet girl named Elise. She vanished on her walk to catechism, steps from the church doors. Her shoes were found under the pews. Her rosary in the baptismal font. The town grieved. Father Drell led the funeral. Closed casket. Then another, and another. A boy from the East Farm. A woman newly pregnant. Each time, no remains. No explanations. But the services continued. Families cried. The choir sang. And the earth accepted coffin after coffin with open arms. 12 years. 157 souls. All vanishing within sight of the same steeple. And still, no one left. Because fear in a town like Greymoor Falls doesn't look like screaming. It looks like silence, like doors locked during the day, like people refusing to look out their windows after dusk. Some began to say the town was cursed, that Saint Eloria's had become something else, something hungrier. But no one dared accuse the church, not out loud, not where it could hear dawn. Instead, they lit more candles, prayed harder, and begged Father Drell to protect them, even as the earth swallowed their families whole. Asterisk. The pattern didn't appear at first. A missing girl. A tragic accident. A family who moved away without a word. One by one, the town rationalized each loss. But grief, when repeated, becomes rhythm. And in Greymoor Falls, the rhythm was undeniable. Every 3 months, someone vanished. Always someone. Connected to the church. A choir boy. A bell ringer. A widow who cleaned the altar linen. No blood, no struggle. Just silence. Then a funeral. Then a box lowered into the ground, too light to contain a body. Some noticed. They spoke in hushed tones, behind locked doors. They compared notes, timelines, questions whispered between sips of coffee or behind pews after Mass. Why were there no coroner's reports? Why did no one ever see the bodies? And why did every single disappearance occur within 20 feet of Saint Eloria's? A schoolteacher, Miss Fenwick, started keeping a ledger. Names, dates, photos. Her pages stretched quickly. Too quickly. She confronted Father Drell once, only once. The next morning, she was gone. Her home empty. Her classroom untouched. Her ledger burned to ash. The priest said she'd moved to care for a sick sister in Ohio. No one had ever heard her speak of a sister. But no one asked again. Then came the nights. People reported strange sounds outside their homes. Not footsteps, but dragging, like something pulling itself along the dirt. Dogs stopped barking. Birds went silent. The forest near the church grew thicker, though no one planted a thing. A maintenance worker who went to trim the overgrown vines around the bell tower returned pale and shaking. He quit the next day and moved out of state. His final words were overheard in the diner. I saw eyes in stone, watching, blinking. There were more reports. The church bell ringing at midnight, even when the rope lay coiled. Chalk symbols. On the chapel floor, no one admitted to drawing. A young altar boy found speaking in tongues, then never speaking again. Father Drell dismissed it all. He smiled. He preached of patience, of trials, of trust in the unseen. His voice never rose. His hands never trembled. And still, the disappearances continued. At one funeral, a mourner claimed the coffin moved just before burial. Another said she heard whispers coming from the box. The groundskeeper insisted it was the wind. But he wouldn't stay after dark again. In 1960, the sheriff's teenage son vanished. That was the first time an outsider was called in. Investigator Jacob Tillman arrived from Pittsburgh. He asked questions. Too many. He stayed for 4 weeks, combing church records, interviewing townsfolk. He didn't pack when he left. Didn't check out of the inn. His car was found still running, parked behind the church, facing the woods. The only thing left behind was his notebook, pages ripped out. Only one sentence scrawled across the back cover. They're not dead. They're taken. After that, the town changed. People stopped talking. Curtains stayed drawn. Children were kept indoors. And Saint Eloria's, once the heart of Greymoor Falls, became something else entirely. Not a sanctuary. Not a house of God, but a gate. And behind that gate, something was waiting, pulling people through. One by one. Without a sound, asterisk, there was never a shortage of documentation. That's what made it so disturbing. The town kept immaculate records, parish rosters, baptism certificates, funeral programs, typed and laminated. Each disappearance was accounted for. Official. Sealed with the church's golden wax stamp. All perfectly in order. Too perfect. No police files. No missing persons bulletins beyond the town limits. No autopsy reports, because no bodies were ever recovered. Just dates, names, and the same copy-pasted phrase on every funeral file. Remains unrecognizable. Casket sealed by order of clergy. It was only years later, when a researcher named Helen Croft visited Greymoor Falls in the spring of 1972, that the cracks began to show. She had come to write a book on religious trauma in isolated communities. But Saint Eloria's wasn't just a footnote. It became her obsession. She spent months interviewing locals, collecting whispers. She sketched the altar, traced the layout of the graveyard, took soil samples from behind the pulpit where nothing grew. And she found things. In the church basement, behind a false wall in the storage cellar, Helen discovered a trapdoor. Beneath it, stone stairs, cold and wet, leading to an undocumented chamber. No church blueprints had marked it. No priest had ever spoken of it. She found remnants, bone fragments, wax circles, symbols burned into the stone, some resembling ancient Latin, others older, unfamiliar. There were jars, dozens, filled with cloudy water and bits of hair, teeth, and what she described in her notes as biological tissue suspended unnaturally in time. Helen sent samples to a university lab. The response was immediate. Specimens appear human. DNA damaged. Cellular decay. Arrested. The lab requested more. She never sent them. 3 days after mailing her report, Helen disappeared. Her car was found by the river. Her motel room untouched. In her journal, found beneath the passenger's seat, she had scribbled one phrase over and over, growing less legible with each line. The altar is not where they worship. It's where they feed. Her case remains unsolved, but her work remained. In 1974, the chamber beneath Saint Eloria's was briefly reopened by a small team of independent investigators. 3 men, 1 woman. Their findings were buried in a single surviving audio recording. It crackled with interference, faint breathing. Then one of them spoke. There's something humming under the floor, like it's alive. And then silence. The tape ended abruptly. The investigators were never seen again. All that was left was their equipment, returned anonymously to the local sheriff's office. The church denied the chamber ever existed. Then came the exhumation. Under pressure from grieving families, the town reluctantly opened one of the graves. It belonged to a young woman named Clara Holt, vanished in 1961, buried 3 days later. Her mother had begged for answers for over a decade. The coffin was lifted. It weighed less than 40 pounds. When opened, there was no body, only a small bundle of twigs wrapped in faded ribbon. Inside, a note, handwritten, no signature. She walks where the light does not reach. Do not follow. Clara's mother collapsed. The case was closed within a week. Cause of death listed as clerical error. But that wasn't the end. Private letters surfaced. Correspondence between Father Drell and a monk from a monastery long since destroyed by fire. In them, he speaks of the Beneath One, an entity or force that requires silence and reverence. That gives clarity. In exchange for presence, not a presence like worship. A physical presence. A person, a sacrifice. He wrote. They step into the hush willingly. They are not taken. They are chosen. But no one remembers anyone choosing. And if they did, no one ever returned to tell the story. Asterisk grief doesn't echo in Greymoor Falls. It stains. The families didn't just lose people. They lost memory, clarity, peace. It began slowly. Faces forgotten in photographs. Laughter faded from memory like smoke through the trees. A mother stood in her daughter's room for hours and couldn't remember the sound of her voice. A father found himself calling a name he swore he never gave his son. They buried loved ones without bodies. But it was the absence that haunted them, more than death ever could. Some mothers kept setting the table for children who were no longer there. Plates, napkins, prayer, night after night. Then silence. Sometimes they'd wake in the morning to find the chairs pulled out. Mud tracked across the kitchen floor. Others began to sleepwalk, wander, speak in languages they didn't know. One man, Thomas Bell, lost his wife in 1962. She'd vanished on her way home from the Wednesday evening service. Days later, he began digging in their backyard. First a hole, then a trench, then a tunnel, deeper, deeper, until his hands bled. When neighbors found him, he whispered, "She's underneath. I hear her scratching." He was taken away. Never spoke again. The town became brittle. Conversations frayed. Neighbors turned to strangers. No one made eye contact in the pews. Children grew quiet, aged too fast, stopped asking questions they used to ask. A teacher burned her entire classroom's art project after a girl drew Saint Eloria's with no roof and eyes where the window should be. Another mother smashed every mirror in her home. Said she saw her son's reflection standing behind her, smiling, even though he had no mouth. Nightmares weren't dreams anymore. They were warnings. People dreamt of hollow bells ringing endlessly, of walking into the chapel and finding it empty. No pews, no altar, just a black pit stretching down where the floor used to be. Some woke up with soil under their fingernails. Others never woke up at all. A kind of madness began to seep through the streets, but not loud. Never loud. It was the quiet kind. The kind that tiptoes in and locks the doors behind it. No. Funerals were held after 1963. People stopped pretending. When someone disappeared, they didn't hold services. They just left flowers at the gate. Or didn't. Graves stopped being dug. But one woman, the last organist Ruth Linton, kept going. She'd lost her sister, her nephew, and eventually her voice. But every Sunday, she returned to the church and played. She never looked at the pews. She just played the same hymn, over and over, until her fingers bled. She was found dead at the organ in 1965. The coroner noted no cause, no trauma, just absence, as if something had slowly drained her until she was hollow. In her journal, one sentence was underlined 3 times. There is a weight behind the silence. If you listen long enough, it starts to listen back. The town never recovered. Not fully. Because what happened in Saint Eloria's wasn't just about death. It was about removal. Erasure. A grief too shapeless to hold, but heavy enough to crush every life it touched. And long after the church doors were sealed and the bell stopped ringing, the silence never truly left. It waits. Still. In every empty room. In every unanswered question. In every coffin that should have held a body, but didn't. The state finally stepped in, but not for justice, for containment. By 1970, enough. Outsiders had gone missing trying to investigate Saint Eloria's, that something had to be done. The church was sealed, declared structurally unsafe. The grounds marked as private religious property. A chain-link fence was put up, topped with rusted wire. A notice on the gate. No trespassing. Active investigation. Do not enter. But the investigation was never truly active, because no one wanted the real answers. Not the state, not the town, and certainly not the church. The official report offered a single theory, a psychological contagion, a slow-moving panic that infected the minds of the devout, driving them into fugue states. The missing had likely wandered into the woods, got lost, died of exposure. Wild animals took the rest. Was tidy, neat, and completely false. No bones were ever found, no blood, no clothing, and not one of the 157 ever came back. Other theories began to surface, quiet ones, whispered in basements or scribbled in anonymous letters. Some blamed the land itself, the beneath one, a folkloric entity that had roots far older than the church. Native stories told of a hollow mouth in the earth that needed to be fed, a place where voices went to die. When settlers arrived, they ignored the warnings, built their altar directly on the thinning skin of the world. One letter, unsigned, claimed Saint Eloria's was never a church, that it was always a gate, that Father Drell hadn't been sent. But summoned. Another theory came from a physicist who studied acoustic structures in religious buildings. He claimed Saint Eloria's design, down to its arches and stone patterns, created frequencies that didn't just echo sound. They bent it, folded it. If sound could be folded, what else could be? His final paper ended with a question. What happens to reality in a place that rejects echo? There were also the ritual theorists. They believed the disappearances were sacrifices, that every 13th Sunday, the church selected a name. No one knew how. No one heard it aloud. But somehow, the chosen person always came, walked willingly, smiled at the door, then gone. And then there were the followers. Long after the church closed, signs appeared, strange marks carved into trees, painted onto old stones, a circle with an inverted key. The same symbol found beneath the altar. One traveler said he saw people in black robes kneeling outside the gate at midnight, faces covered, hands cut, praying, waiting. Some believe the followers are trying to reopen the church. Others say it was never closed. The most disturbing theory, though, came from an old man who once served as Father Drell's assistant. He had left town in the early 60s, but returned for one final visit in 1975. He refused to go near the church, only speaking through a cracked window in his truck. He said Father Drell had discovered something, a method, a process of stripping the soul from the body without damage, that he had learned how to walk someone out of this world without dying. He said the bodies weren't in the ground. They weren't even dead. They were somewhere else. He called it the hush. The man whispered, a place without time, without voice, a silence so thick you forget you were ever alive. The man vanished a week later. No note, just the sound of his truck idling in the woods. To this day, there are no conclusive findings, no arrests. No one held accountable. Saint Eloria's remains, chained shut, but the flowers still appear at the gate, always fresh, no footsteps in the dirt, no witnesses, and every few years someone goes missing again. A hiker, a journalist, a thrill-seeker. Drawn by the same question. What really happened inside that church? But no one ever leaves with answers, only more silence. The town still exists. Greymoor Falls. Most maps don't show it anymore. The roads are overgrown. The signs rusted. But if you look hard enough, if you really want to find it, you still can. People live there. A few quiet, weathered, unwilling to speak. They say nothing about the church. Saint Eloria still stands. Cracked windows. Weeds choking its steps. The roof sags under time, but the bell tower remains intact, looming over the valley like a raised finger. Not warning, not blessing, just watching. No one rings the bell, but sometimes it rings anyway. People who visit, those who dare, say the air near the church is heavier, like it holds its breath, like it's listening. Some claim they hear voices from the crypt. Others, footsteps circling the pews when the building is empty. One man described a woman in a veil, standing at the altar. He blinked, and she was gone. but the candle beside her still smoked. They say if you speak too loudly inside, the sound doesn't carry. It falls, like a rock into water, swallowed whole. They say if you kneel where the pulpit used to be, you feel warmth beneath the floorboards, a pulse. And if you stay too long, you forget why you came. Most people leave before dark. Not all of them make it back. No one has been able to explain how a church could bury 157 coffins without bodies. No one can explain how Father Drell, last seen in 1963, still appears in occasional photographs, unaged. No one knows who leaves the flowers at the gate, or why they leave them in groups of 13. But the graves are still there, each with a name, each with a date, each with an empty box beneath the soil. The people of Greymoor Falls don't talk about it anymore. They pretend. They garden. They nod. They live small lives. But they don't forget. Because the silence is never far. It hums through the fields. At night, it waits in the forest where the trees no longer fall. It lingers behind their reflections in glass, like something leaning in, just out of view. Some say the church is dormant. Some say it's hungry again. But the most terrifying thing of all is that no one ever said it was evil. Not really, because evil implies cruelty, intention. But Saint Eloria's? Saint Eloria's just is, a place that never asks for permission. Only presence. And in the end, that may be the answer. Not demons. Not curses. Not madness. Just something ancient, patient, feeding on the forgotten. Because what's more invisible than the missing? What's quieter than grief that no one wants to share? Maybe it was never about rituals, never about faith. Maybe it was about silence all along. The kind of silence that lives deep underground where voices don't echo, and footsteps vanish without a sound, and names once spoken are swallowed by the earth like they were never there at all. Maybe that's the real horror of Greymoor Falls. Not that they buried empty coffins, but that they knew they were empty and buried them anyway.